Blue windbreakers with Postal Inspection Service stenciled across the back swarmed the HOA gazebo like bees on a soda can. Our president, Patrice Voss, clutched a stack of confiscated mail and tried to pivot into a community meeting speech while a federal agent clicked handcuffs around her wrist. Someone's bed bath and Beyond coupon fluttered away like a tiny witness protection program. I just stood by the mailbox cluster holding a bouquet of return-to-sender letters addressed to me and said with a deadpan one, "So do I get my water bill back or what?" I'm Evan Trammell, quiet homeowner at Mapler Crest Downs, a cul-de-sac kingdom where lawn stripes have more rights than people. I keep to myself, coffee at 6 in the morning, headphones while I sand furniture in the garage, wave politely, keep my grass a lawful 2.75 in. I learned early that flying under the radar was the key to survival in an HOA neighborhood. Pay your dues on time, paint your house approved beige number 7, and never, ever make eye contact during the monthly meetings. Enter Patrice Voss, HOA president with helmet hair that could survive a hurricane, Pilates posture that made her look perpetually ready to pounce, and a clipboard that could file a restraining order. She had been president for 6 years, having run unopposed every election because nobody else wanted the job. But Patrice didn't just want it. She needed it. The power fed something deep in her soul. Her crusade was to purify the block from visual clutter, which in her taxonomy included my porch light because it was too warm, my house numbers because they were insufficiently serif, and, fatally, my mailbox. A regulation USPS cluster unit she insisted was aesthetic pollution. Never mind that it was installed by the Postal Service itself. Never mind that it served 12 households. Never mind that it was literally federal property. To Patrice, it was an eyesore that disrupted her vision of suburban perfection. She had campaigned for months to have it relocated, moved, replaced, or buried underground. The Postal Service had politely declined every request. So Patrice decided to take matters into her own hands, which is where things went spectacularly wrong. First came citations for non-compliant receptacle usage, printed on official HOA letterhead with my address misspelled. Then a newsletter article about abusers of postal amenities, names withheld, but with a pointed reference that ET knows who they are. I found the newsletter in my door jamb. The relevant passage highlighted in yellow, soon. My mail began boomeranging, packages marked as refused, bills stamped undeliverable, and a birthday card for my sister resealed with a sticky note that read, "Item open for HOA security." I called my sister to confirm she had actually sent it. She had. The card contained a $20 bill. The bill was gone. That's when I installed cameras. Subtle ones, pointed at the mailbox cluster from my living room window. The footage was remarkable. Patrice appeared every morning at 7:15 like clockwork with a janitor's ring of keys. She would jam the outgoing slot with what looked like folded cardboard, making it impossible for residents to send mail. She pried at the parcel compartment with a screwdriver, trying to pop the locks. And she wore latex gloves through all of it like she was about to operate on a cantaloupe. The gloves suggested she knew what she was doing was wrong. But the confidence in her movement suggested she believed she was untouchable. She even stood at the cluster box during delivery time, intercepting envelopes with the authority of a deputy of absolutely nothing. I watched her redirect my neighbor's Netflix DVDs, back when people still got those, into her own bag. The letter carrier looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. Later, I learned carriers are trained not to confront people who interfere with mail. They just report it. I walked to the post office to ask what fresh nonsense this was. The clerk, a patient woman named Donna, listened to my story with growing concern. Then she vanished behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and returned with a man in a polo shirt and khakis who introduced himself as Inspector C. Ruiz from the United States Postal Inspection Service. Schneider had no idea the Postal Service had inspectors, let alone that they carried badges and guns. Inspector Ruiz did not look like someone you wanted to mess with. I showed him the video on my phone. He watched silently, his expression never changing. Then he blinked once, like a cat who just located the laser pointer. He told me in a serious tone that obstructing or stealing United States mail is a federal matter, Not a civil issue, not an HOA dispute, but a federal crime with federal consequences. He handed me a card and asked me to keep filming. He also asked me not to confront Patrice directly. Let her keep going, he said. Sometimes people dig their own holes. 2 days later, Patrice escalated in a way that made my jaw drop. She taped a laminated HOA order over the mail slots that read, "Mail service suspended for Unit 14B until fines are paid," and used what looked like a master key to lock the outgoing bin. The key was silver with a triangular head. Later, I learned this was called an arrow key, a master key used by postal carriers to access cluster boxes, and possession of one by unauthorized individuals is a federal crime in itself. My doorbell camera caught the key, the grin, and her whisper as she said to herself with satisfaction, "Let's tidy up, shall we?" She stood back to admire her work like an artist finishing a painting. Then she walked to her house 2 doors down, swinging the key ring on her finger. I emailed Inspector Ruiz the footage within minutes. That afternoon, a plain sedan with a magnetic antenna slid to the curb. 2 agents in civilian clothes sat inside watching. They didn't approach. They didn't knock on doors. They just waited. I watched from my window, curious about what would happen next. At 3:30, like clockwork, our letter carrier approached with his mail cart. Patrice materialized from behind the hydrangeas like a suburban velociraptor, moving faster than I thought possible in ballet flats. She blocked the carrier with a palm-out gesture and began lecturing about jurisdiction, about HOA rules, about her authority as president. Her voice carried across the lawn. "This is a private community," she said, "and I decide what happens with our amenities." The carrier, a mild-mannered guy named Marcus, who I had chatted with a few times, said loudly and clearly, "Ma'am, this is the United States Mail. You need to step back." Her response, delivered with absolute conviction and a finger pointed at his chest, was, "This is Mapler Crest Downs. I am the president. You follow my rules here." The sedan doors opened. 2 people stepped out, and suddenly they were wearing blue windbreakers that said Postal Inspection Service in big white letters. Polite introductions followed. Badges were shown. The words, "Do you have a postal arrow key?" hung in the air like a challenge. Patrice's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, calculation. She drew herself up to her full height 5'4" in flats and responded with authority. "As HOA president, I have every right to," but she was cut off by the click of handcuffs. One agent, a woman with gray hair and the demeanor of a disappointed teacher, said clearly, "Ma'am, you are not authorized to possess a postal arrow key. That is a felony." The key, still on the ring attached to Patrice's belt loop, gleamed in the sun like a plot device. The agents opened her tote bag, the oversized canvas one with her initials embroidered on the side, and the contents spoke volumes. Stacks of residence envelopes, rubber banded by address, sorted by street. At least 40 pieces of mail that should have been delivered days ago. She insisted dismissively that they were for sorting purposes, that she was helping the Postal Service be more efficient. 3 open pieces of mail sat on top, including what looked like a credit card statement and a medical bill. And my missing package, an orbital sander I had ordered 2 weeks prior, sat half unboxed at the bottom of the bag, with packing material still clinging to it. The agents photographed everything. All of this was on camera, both mine and theirs. The agents recited charges involving obstruction of mail, possession of a postal arrow key, and theft or receipt of stolen mail. The HOA board gathered on the sidewalk with mouths hanging open. Board member Linda Chen, who had never liked Patrice but had been too afraid to challenge her, looked like she might start applauding. Patrice tried to pivot into parliamentary procedure, her last refuge. She announced formally, her voice shaking slightly, "Point of order. This is a community matter that should be handled internally according to our bylaws." But a handcuff closed around her other wrist with a metallic snap. Somewhere, sprinklers turned on across 3 lawns in what felt like a standing ovation. Mist crowned the blue windbreakers as they guided her past the identical azalea beds toward their vehicle. Neighbors emerged from houses. Someone was filming on their phone. Patrice kept trying to explain, kept insisting this was a misunderstanding, that she was protecting property values, that she had the authority. The agents said nothing. They didn't need to. Inspector Ruiz explained the charges in detail as we stood near the mailbox cluster, his voice calm and methodical. Federal obstruction of mail carries up to 5 years in prison and fines up to $250,000. Possession of a postal arrow key without authorization, another 5 years. Theft of mail, up to 5 years per offense. And he counted at least 43 pieces in her bag, though they would probably consolidate the charges. He mentioned that opening mail not addressed to you is also a separate federal offense. Each opened envelope could be its own charge. Patrice stood near the sedan, her hands cuffed behind her back, her face shifting from indignation to comprehension to pure shock as the weight of federal charges settled over her like a heavy blanket. The math was devastating. Even with a plea deal, she was looking at serious prison time. Her face went pale. She tried to speak, opening her mouth to protest, to explain, to justify. But one of the agents said something quietly about her right to remain silent, and she went silent, her mouth still open. The HOA board members whispered among themselves, distancing themselves physically and verbally from their former president. One board member, Tom Richards, said loud enough for everyone to hear that they had no knowledge of any mail interference, that this was entirely Patrice acting alone, that the board would cooperate fully with the investigation. Linda Chen was already on her phone, probably calling an emergency meeting to elect a new president. Patrice looked at me across the lawn, her expression a mixture of disbelief and rage, as if I had somehow orchestrated this entire situation rather than simply defended my right to receive mail. Her eyes were wide, her carefully applied makeup starting to run from sweat or tears or both. She said nothing, but her face said everything. The reality that she had committed multiple federal crimes over a mailbox aesthetic dispute was finally visibly sinking in. As the agents placed her in the back of the sedan, I could see her mouth moving, probably still trying to invoke some HOA bylaw that would magically override federal law. It wouldn't. Inspector Ruiz closed his notebook, looked at the remaining board members, and said in a tone that left no room for interpretation that interfering with United States mail is a federal offense, and the Postal Inspection Service takes these matters very seriously. He added that they would be interviewing other residents to determine the full scope of the mail interference. If anyone else had experienced problems, they should come forward. The sedan pulled away from the curb, Patrice visible through the rear window, her helmet hair finally deflated, her shoulders slumped. Her clipboard lay abandoned on the gazebo table like a discarded weapon, pages fluttering in the breeze. The mailbox cluster stood undisturbed, exactly where it had always been. Exactly where it would remain, now marked as evidence with yellow tape, the letter carrier. Marcus finally delivered the mail, and I received 6 pieces that had been held hostage for a week. One was my water bill. I looked at it and smiled.